made a trip to Kentucky and look what I came back with. And we're like, man, that's just our normal day.
Yeah, it is our normal day. And, sometimes I wonder if we have a real business pursuit here or just an excuse for Andre and I to travel around to different distilleries.
And welcome everyone to episode 178 of The Mashup, the best bourbon conversation you're going to hear all week long. We're your hosts, Anthony, Kenny, and Steven. Hi, fellas.
What's up, gents?
Hello. I love that introduction. Good job. Thank you. You really got in there. So you guys know back when we started doing the Tuesday episodes, right? We talked about the fact that we had these short episodes we're going to do as bottle reviews, and we also talked about having some industry folks on the podcast if we were lucky and fortunate enough to do that. So tonight, we actually have two guests. Any guess on who the guests are, Kenny? Even though they're sitting in front of us, can you guess?
No.
No? Steven, any guesses?
Not my wildest dreams.
So I'm not exactly sure how this happened, but when we were getting ready to record this podcast, I thought to myself, how are we going to tell our listening audience that we have a Kentucky senator and a lawyer here? They probably thought, what, these guys probably are getting arrested or something, and they wanted to record it live on air. No. Anyway, but tonight we have long-serving Kentucky State Senator Damon Thayer, and we also have his business partner, who is an attorney and in the equine industry, Andre Regard. And so, welcome to the podcast, gentlemen.
Thanks for having us, guys. This is going to be fun.
Happy to be here. Thanks.
Awesome.
So I was at J-Hob a couple weeks ago. I was talking to Sloan, and he talked about Damon, and he was coming into the shop with some of the new releases and stuff. And he's like, "You met Damon?" I'm like, "No." So we meet Damon, and boom, we're like, "Hey, let's do a pod. Let's."
I think we had it scheduled within 5 minutes.
Yes,
I whipped out my phone. You whipped out your phone.
Found
the
official calendar. You got it.
And of course, we're here in our official roles as co-founder of Kentucky Senator Spirits, the company that is the proprietor of Kentucky Senator Bourbon.
There we go.
Exactly. See, that's a part that I didn't even get to because I was just so excited to tell our listening audience who we had with us tonight. So, absolutely. So, can you tell us, because when Kenny was talking about how this came about and the scheduling of it, I was just shocked because I was standing there.
Fast.
Yeah, I was like, that happened really fast. And how the heck did that come together so quickly? And what's your guys' relationship? How did you meet? Are you longtime friends? And yeah, can you talk a little bit about that and how this get us kicked off here?
Sure. So I've been in the horse business for a long time, and back in the early 2000s, when Damon was starting his political career, I had an opportunity to meet him, and we kind of knew each other in passing for quite a while, maybe 5 or 6 years, and then started doing some work together in the early 2010s. And as a lawyer, I would do some legal work from time to time for Damon. So I think we really met each other because we both have a love for the horse industry. And then in the mid-2000s, we both found a love for bourbon. So we both started drinking some bourbon together. And then Damon came up to me one day and gave me a business proposal. I'll let him tell a little bit about how that went down.
I'll just say horses and bourbon, that goes together. That's like synonymous.
Yeah. And actually, politics is sort of what brought us together because he was involved with the Kentucky Equine Education Project, which is a group that the late Governor Burton Jones co-founded to help support horse industry initiatives in Frankfort. And that was part of my jam, jam as a Kentucky state senator. So, horses, politics, and bourbon, we've kind of got the Kentucky trifecta down.
Sure. Yeah, 100%. Absolutely.
And, I never started drinking bourbon until after my divorce occurred when I was in my early 40s.
Oh, wow.
I never drank bourbon in my life.
Wow.
And, but in the legislature, the Kentucky Distillers Association started pursuing more free market principles for the bourbon industry. When Prohibition ended in 1933, it was left to the states on a state-by-state basis, which was appropriate under the 10th Amendment, to regulate and legislate bourbon laws. Well, Kentucky, being a heavily Baptist state back then, still is to some extent, but not as much as it was back then, enacted a lot of really restrictive laws when it came to bourbon. And about 10 years ago, the bourbon boom was just starting. And, my philosophy as a legislator has always been to try to remove artificial barriers to free enterprise. Mm-hmm. And so I started working with the Kentucky Distillers Association on legislation to help elevate and escalate the bourbon industry and remove some of these awful barriers to entry for the bourbon industry. For example, it wasn't very long ago where you could only buy a few bottles when you went to a distillery. You couldn't have a cocktail, for example, at a distillery. Right. So, those are just some of the laws. And, here we are. I'm at the end of my 22-year career in the Senate, and I'm walking out the door with a perfect record on bourbon issues, which I'm very proud of.
I'm thankful for, because when I go to the distillery, I get cases. So
I mean, we met at Justin's House of Bourbon.
Right.
We passed the Dusty Bottle Act, the Vintage Spirits Act, however you want to call it, that allowed that business to exist and give us all access to some of these dusty bottles that we never had before. And that's how I've gotten to know Justin Sloan and Justin Thompson. But I started getting invited to these events at bourbon distilleries to celebrate, every year when we would pass a new law, eliminating one of these artificial barriers to free enterprise. And the great thing about when you go to an event at a bourbon distillery, they're always going to give you samples. And I admit, I was a wimpy drinker. Course. My whole life. Like Pinot Grigio and Riesling and, fruity wines. I was the king of the pink drink, Kind of embarrassing to admit. But, I'm not running this year, so who cares?
No, I'll
tell you guys everything you want to know.
That's perfect. That's the kind of stuff we want to know.
So,
in Louisiana, there are no pink drinks.
So the other thing, I'm originally from northern Michigan. I've been in Kentucky now 32 years. I tell people I wasn't born in Kentucky, but I came as soon as I could. And Andre's from Louisiana.
Okay.
So you got, two
JT Mellick.
There you go. That's that brand
rice
is
whiskey
making rice whiskey now. But I'm an Ohio transplant, and these two are native Kentuckians here, so at least we got them outnumbered tonight. But so in talking about your your sort of journey with that, so you didn't start drinking bourbon till your 40s.
Yes.
Can you tell? I'd love to hear from both of you. Like, what was the starter drink, or what was the first bourbons that you had, and then what were kind of like the ones where you were like, wait a minute, back up.
I need a little bit more of this.
Since I've done that longer than Damon, I'll start before Damon.
Perfect.
He's from Louisiana. He started drinking a lot earlier than I did.
Don't forget Sazerac's a Louisiana company.
It is. That's true.
Probably the first bourbon I would have had would have been Old Charter. That would have been your typical Louisiana. It would have been Old Charter 12.
Yeah.
When I was a kid.
That's amazing.
Which I don't think they make anymore. Maybe an 8. I think Old Charter recently became an unaged.
No, it's unaged now. Yeah, it definitely is. It's unaged, and people still talk about the old times with it. But Kenny, you're looking over there at your shelf.
I'm looking at my shelf because I thought I had an Old Charter over there. I was going to pour one out here real quick.
Yeah. It was like a 12, and then it went to an 8, and then most recently I saw it was unaged.
Yeah, they still put a number on there, but it doesn't mean anything.
It says like recipe number 8 or something. Yeah, it's kind of a trick.
Yeah.
Being an attorney, we kind of look at those types of things. But anyway, but I would say my first kind of hardcore, and we're going to move a little bit away from bourbon because at the end of the day, even though it is Kentucky whiskey, Jack Daniels is a bourbon.
Yeah, that's true.
Would have been going to Colorado when I was a kid. Cough, and was handed a bottle of Jack Daniels and a Coke until I couldn't drink the Coke till I swallowed the Jack Daniels.
Oh, there you go.
I probably was 14 at the time.
Oh, my goodness.
So, Louisiana, we start soon. Grew up going to Christmas and always having a pitcher of Old Fashions that my dad would make with either Old Charter or Beam White Label.
Wow.
And then we had cousins in Alabama that would make bourbon, make whiskey, and my dad would get it for Christmas in milk jugs. He got 5 gallons a year.
Oh my goodness!
And we would get little 5-gallon mini cask, and we would pour them in. He would stick it in a closet, and after about 5 years, we started taking out he'd put it in the back of his pickup truck for the first year, in the toolbox.
Wanted to make sure it got movement, right?
Exactly. So for a year, it would sit in the toolbox going back and forth, and we would put it in the closet. And after about 5 years, our Christmas tradition was to empty then refill. So we would empty our own whiskey that came from Alabama, taste it, make sure it was good, wake up the next day, taste it again, realize it was still too hot.
Wow.
Cut it down some more, and then we would bottle it into old bottles of Highland Mist.
Wow.
Highland Mist.
And my dad had a label that was made. He just liked the way the Highland Mist bottles looked.
Okay.
So we he just put Regard's bourbon on it, and it was kind of a home brew. So
That's
that was
awesome.
my exposure as a kid.
But what was a premium one that like set it off for you? Is there a moment you remember? Like for me, it was George T. Stagg at New Year's Pour when I first moved here, like 2 years after I got here. I'm like, wait a minute, where's this been all my life?
For me, I think it was Eagle Rare.
Okay.
I'd been in Kentucky, so I lived in Louisiana, lived in Washington, D.C., wasn't much of a bourbon drinker at that point, mainly a Scotch drinker. Then I moved to Kentucky in '99, a transplant like Damon, got involved in the horse business for 8 years, just ran a horse farm, didn't even practice law. And kind of early on in there, I would say it was probably Eagle Rare, where I was like, wow, this is really good.
Right, and that would have been Old Prentice stuff then, wouldn't it? Back
What year was that roughly?
Probably 2001, 2002.
yeah, that would have been before Buffalo Trace was making it for sure.
See, my story is not nearly as exciting as Andre's.
I'm sure it is. Come on, let's hear it.
So I joke around. You know, I got divorced 12 years ago, and I joke
Drove
around.
me to drinking.
I joke around that, you know, bourbon was always there for me. Bourbon didn't care how many Republican dinners I went to. Bourbon didn't care how late I came home at night.
There you go.
I joke around about that, and I probably shouldn't, because I mean, I actually have a pretty good relationship with my ex-wife. She's a great mom, and we work pretty well together to co-parent our kids. But the truth is, I think I remember my first sample when Jim Beam opened up a new distribution warehouse not far from the Capitol in Frankfurt. And they invited a bunch of us over there for a ribbon cutting, and they passed around some Jim Beam Black when it was still aged 8 years. Remember those few years when the Jim Beam Black was
7.
8 years old? Now it's then they called it Jim Beam Extra Aged, which meant it was probably 4 years and 5 minutes. And now, you know, there's been derivations of that, but that was my first. I'm like, wow, this is pretty good stuff. You know, they've given out free samples. But oddly enough, and Andre and I have never talked about this, the first real good bottle that I tried was Eagle Rare 10-year, be about probably 12 years ago, maybe 14 years ago. And I thought, this is really good. And that's when you could still buy Eagle Rare
Right on the shelf.
Right on the shelf.
Yep.
But I thought, this is really good stuff. I drank a lot of Woodford Reserve. I used to work for the Breeders' Cup.
Okay.
Before I got into politics, and they were the official bourbon of the Breeders' Cup for a while, and then, you know, official bourbon of the Derby, and so there was a lot of crossover there with my horse racing interests. So I drank a lot of Woodford Reserve, but besides our own bourbon, everybody asks, "What's your favorite bourbon?" I said, "Well, besides Kentucky Senator Bourbon, I'm my sort of daily drinker that I like is Maker's 46, and I'm a big Weller fan, especially Weller Antique.
Yeah.
And if I can get my hands on it, you know, that any Weller Full Proof or the Weller Single Barrel, which I've only had that maybe 3 times in my life.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Damon and I are on opposite sides of wheat versus rye.
Oh.
So I'm definitely a rye guy.
All right, I am too. Anthony is a weeder guy. Anthony is a weeder.
See, we're big,
I'm a rye guy.
we're Big Ten guys.
There you go.
I'm Michigan State.
Penn State.
Yeah,
Yep.
see?
We're
You know,
weeder
a real
guys.
football conference, for
There you
example.
go.
Oh, excuse me. Also,
Hang
a
on.
real basketball conference.
There you go.
You better be glad you're not running again. So
Go Tigers.
GEAUX, right?
Exactly.
There you go.
When I moved to Kentucky, I didn't really know the part of my family history that my great-great-grandfather had gone to school in Bardstown in 1881.
Really?
Wow.
There used to be a train that went from Louisville to New Orleans, and between Louisville and New Orleans, it went through a very French area of Louisiana called Avoyelles Parish. Mansoura was the name of the town. So these boys would leave Mansoura, and they would go to school in Bardstown at St. Joe's Preparatory College, which is associated with the cathedral in Bardstown, which is the second oldest cathedral in the United States outside of Baltimore. It's called the Proto-Cathedral. That was before Louisiana was part of America and California and whatnot. But anyhow, so these boys would go to a Jesuit school there, and he ended up marrying a girl from Bardstown in 1882, and they were married in Louisville. And her father, and I found this all out after I moved to Kentucky, was named F.L. Ferriel, and with R.B. Barber, he was the founder of O Grandad Whiskey. F.L. Ferriel was the grandson of Basil Hayden.
That is.
Wow.
So I found that all out after I moved here, and then he ended up going back to Louisiana, and they grew up in Louisiana. So I started drinking O Grandad, at that point.
Of course.
And if you're going to drink Old Grandad, you can start liking a high rye.
Yeah.
And Old Grandad 114, I still think is one of the best values on the market. I think all the Old Grandad product is really good product that Beam has just kind of, not really promoted and spent money on, but for a drink, it makes some really, really good drinks. So I've always been kind of partial to that one.
We've talked about that a lot, and the funny thing is I feel like they keep saying they're going to discontinue it, and then everybody goes out and clears the shelf, and that happens every 3 or 4 years.
And then there's
But Steven, even way back before Kenny was on the podcast, we would talk a lot about Old Grandad 114 is like a really good shelfer to have at all times because it has a really good thing. And of course, once you were on here, then you confirmed the same thing, right?
Yeah, they call it like the bartender's secret because it's like a high proof. They can cut through the mixed drinks.
Yeah.
And they haven't pulled that Heaven Hill trick yet where they pull it off a shelf and pull it back in 2 years later and triple the price.
with a new name.
Dude.
What are you talking about?
I know. We've talked about that so many times.
It's a pretty blue bottle now.
We are so going to get sued now.
Anyway, so I've always been kind of the rye, the Old Grandad. I love the old Forester products series with the numbers on them, 1910, 1898, great series, and then the Four Roses products.
Say Four Roses, that's what you asked for earlier, yeah. So they're 20 and 35, depending on which that one's a OB, so that's a 35% rye that you tasted there.
Yeah.
Now Maker's 46. So which I'm a higher proof guy usually, I just discovered Maker's 46 cask like literally a month ago. So now, I mean, that's a desserty. That's a weeder I do like a lot. So. I enjoy that.
I've been able to do some barrel picks, the private selection program at Maker's Mark with a political group that I'm a part of, and we're getting ready to do our 5th or 6th private barrel pick out there, and it's pretty cool. I mean, very special to go in that bourbon cave or out in the new house they've got on the lake. And Bill Samuels has been a good friend, and I've watched him come to Frankfurt. Here's a guy who's an icon in the bourbon business, and he comes to Frankfurt to lobby on behalf of the industry and advocate on its behalf, and he does it so passionately. He does. Chris Morris comes a lot. Brent Elliott from Four Roses, Ken Lewis from New Riff up in northern Kentucky, Wally Dant from Monks Road. These kind of guys, when you see them come to Frankfurt, and of course Jimmy Russell. Jimmy's come to Frankfurt, and ambled down the hall.
There you go.
Making the case for bourbon legislation. You tend to be a little favorable towards their bourbons.
Right.
Right. But I'm a believer. People say, well, are there any bad bourbons? I'm like, no. They're just well. But I don't want to get into this.
You can be nice. I don't want
to diss anyone else's
You don't need
brand.
to, right?
But there are some.
But I do.
To me, there are bourbons I like, and there are bourbons I like more.
Right.
Let's just put it that way.
That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, I agree with that. That's nice.
Damon may not remember this very well, but about 9 years ago, during one of the gubernatorial elections, it was the same year that Gordon was doing his last year, and if you recall, as he was going from racetrack to racetrack, all of the racetracks were
Jeff Gordon.
Hey, I didn't know who it was.
we're trying to do something nice for him, so he went up to Sparta. And Damon was friendly with the guys up in Sparta, and the KDA put on a presentation for him. So basically, they got Fred Noe and Jimmy Russell and Jim Rutledge and the gentleman from Michter's all together, and they each brought 24 bottles of bourbon.
Oh, my goodness.
Each personally labeled for Jeff Gordon with the number 24 on them. Each personally picked by the distillers. And they do like this 11 o'clock news media thing where they were going to do the presentation, and unfortunately for the drivers that day it was raining, so the drivers hadn't finished their practice laps. Damon and I ended up sitting at a round top, an 8-topper. Damon and I, a couple other people, and those 4 master distillers for about 5 hours.
Oh, wow.
Just talking about bourbon. It was unbelievable.
Well, we waited for the rain delay. I was a marketing consultant for Kentucky Speedway.
Okay.
In a previous life, before the parent company yanked our race and sent it back to Atlanta. So I was the one who put that all together. The Speedway wanted to do something really cool for Jeff Gordon during his farewell tour.
Yeah.
One Speedway gave him like a huge jukebox or something like that for him to put, and someone else got his kid like one of those super powered go-karts. They call them bandoleros or something like that.
Okay.
So the guys I worked for at Kentucky Speedway, Mark Simmendinger, who ran the Speedway, wanted to, who ironically now is a business advisor on our business plan. Shows you what a small world it is. He wanted to do something really special for Jeff Gordon. So we got, those 4 guys from Michter's, Four Roses, Wild Turkey, and what was the other one that you mentioned?
Jim Beam.
Jim Beam.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, and to have them in the room, we had Fred No, Jim Rutledge, Jimmy Russell, and who's the fellow who just passed away a few years ago from Michter's, a really nice guy.
Oh man,
can't remember his name.
Either, yeah. What I want to know is what happened to those bottles.
Well, it turns out that Jeff Gordon was a huge bourbon drinker.
Really?
And he could not believe. I mean, when they took off the blanket from his 96 bottles of bourbon that were being presented, he kind of freaked out, and it was really neat.
So you're telling me we need to find out where Jeff Gordon lives and pay him a visit and see if he still has any of those bottles left.
I think
that's amazing.
That was I'd forgotten all about that, and I'm glad Andre reminded me of it, because that was part of my. That was in the
2015.
Yeah, wow, that was early days in my bourbon education.
I'm a bourbon nerd, so that kind of stuff would have. Loved that.
It was so cool. So what I'm told is Jeff gave a few of those bottles away to key people, but that he had we at Kentucky Speedway had to ship it back to Charlotte, North Carolina, so he could put it in his basement where all of his cool stuff apparently was and still is. Yeah.
Which is illegal because these antiquated laws that we have.
No. He put it in his hauler, in his race car hauler. They were gifted to him, and it put in his hauler.
Leave it to you, Kenny. Come on.
The laws are horrible. You can ship wine, but you can't ship alcohol. It's just
you can in Kentucky. You can. I mean, we can direct ship here, but the problem, and you can ship into Kentucky.
Well, some of the retailers, but like as a person, I'm not supposed to. I got to sign something saying I'm not.
That's correct. Yeah. One step at a time. I got a lot of the big things done that I wanted to do in my legislative career, but there are still some things like that the bourbon business is going to be still chipping away at over the next few years. I mean, you're talking about 80 years of laws post-prohibition,
right,
made by a bunch of Carrie Nation supporters who were professed teetotalers in the legislature for that long.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I must interject one thing.
Okay, yeah, hey, please.
Before your next question,
No, I don't have any questions.
let's cracky senators.
Oh,
all right. So let's do the quick rundown. Kentucky Senator Bourbon is a revived, lapsed brand, that we revived in 2019.
Okay.
We had our first release, a 15-year bourbon, in 2021. We've had a total of 5 releases. Each release is named for a U.S. senator from Kentucky. So far, we are a non-distiller producer, but we are branching out into contract distilling, and we can talk more about that later.
Oh, sweet.
Wonderful.
To bring consistency to the product, we proof everything to 107.
Okay.
But we're not like Maker's Mark or Buffalo Trace or Woodford Reserve, where we're looking for a consistent flavor profile.
Gotcha.
We have one element of Pinhook Bourbon, where they name each of their releases for a racehorse.
Right.
We name each of our releases for U.S. Senator. We have one element of Barrel Bourbon, where each bottle, each release is a different mash bill, or maybe comes from a different distillery.
Okay.
That's going to be
Different
our
flavor profile.
and a different flavor profile moving forward. So people will always be wondering what's up from Kentucky Senator. One other thing, Kentucky Senator Bourbon will never be less than 6 years old because, Professor, a U.S. Senate term is
6 years.
6 years.
Oh, how about that? I didn't even know you were going to say that.
Yep.
I got it right.
So, well done. He's an easy A. He's an easy A.
Good job, Professor.
So we've
There you go.
had a 15-year, a 6-year, a 7-year, an 8-year, and a 9-year.
Okay.
So what we brought with us tonight is a bottle of 8-year, which came out last year, and a bottle of 9-year that just came out. Andre, why don't you start and tell them about the flavor profile on the 8-year and who we named it after?
So these last 4 releases have been a vertical, which is kind of cool because it's the same product but 1 year aged.
I learned that last week at J-Hop with you guys.
So it's really giving you a chance to decide what you like, to see how aging affects bourbon. I think somebody had asked about blending earlier. At this point, to the extent that we blend, it's Damon and I making decisions about what we're going to sell.
Wow. Okay.
But we had about 25 barrels of product, and we decided that we would release them over 4 releases. So it's been really neat to kind of see how that bourbon has aged. Our 8 year was named after John Sherman Cooper, who was a senator from Somerset. Damon and I did our first release during COVID. So it was in 21. The world was a quiet place.
Right.
It was actually during during that big ice storm that hit.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a 15-year-old bourbon, which we knew would get some market pull because of the age. But we just kind of, released it into the market. We did no marketing. We really didn't do much social media before we released it. And we were fortunate to have a partner in Kentucky Eagle who agreed to take our entire allotment on.
Oh, wow.
We were able
That's big. You're sold out right as you begin, right?
Correct. So
the first day.
Yeah, that's great.
So as a producer, you sell to your distributor.
Yep.
If your distributor buys it, they pay them in 30. They pay you in 30 days.
Right.
Liquor stores and bars pay in immediately when they receive the product. Generally.
Right.
So that's kind of the spread that the distributor gets. So we were lucky to get an early relationship with Kentucky Eagle. When we did our second release, it was also during COVID. So we did it. It went well. And the second release was the William DeBow. Quick little funny story. We did our first release, and there were some people that were like, Damon and Andre, y'all are pretty Republican. Y'all are pretty red. There might be some people that are like, that's a bunch of political guys, and it's only going to be kind of segregated to that market. so our first release, and we're both horse guys, and we're drinking bourbon. Our first release was named after a vice president who was from Kentucky, a Democrat, who didn't drink and was against horse racing.
Oh, there you go.
Voted for prohibition.
There you go.
So
Alvin Barkley, who has
Barkley.
a lake named for him in Western Kentucky.
Oh, wow.
So that was fun for us. The second release was William DeBow, who was the first U.S. senator, Republican senator from Kentucky. But when we did our third release, which was the John Carlisle, it was the 125th anniversary of the Bottle and Bond Act. He was the person who drafted that when he was Secretary of Treasury. He had been a U.S. senator. All of a sudden, the guys from Northern Kentucky called us, and they're like, hey, John Carlisle's from up in Northern Kentucky in Newport. Why don't y'all come up, and we're going to have a function for you guys.
Oh, nice.
So that's when we started. In Covington, excuse me. So that's when we realized that this idea of transparency provided some regional pull where people were pretty proud of their politicians.
Right.
That's cool stuff.
So we went up there, and then
we had a launch party at Smoke Justice right there in Covington.
Okay.
Great bourbon bar.
Yep.
I've never been there. Have either of you guys been there?
I have not.
It's an amazing place.
Okay, we're going to have to go there.
Yeah, it's got great food. Some other places are around it, and the mayor came. The judge executive came out.
The mayor of Covington, Kenton County Judge Executive. Joe Burrow hangs out there, by the way.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really small bar.
Ken, who you mentioned earlier from New Riff.
That's where you had your...
out.
Yes.
Ken Lewis came.
So that provided us a little bit of the idea that there was this regional pull. People wanted to do things. So John Sherman Cooper, who I'm not from Kentucky, so I'm not really familiar with a lot of these folks. He's from Somerset, Kentucky legend. U.S. Senator elected multiple times.
First Republican to be elected more than once in
Okay.
Kentucky to the U.S. Senate, back when Kentucky was a blue state.
And
Wow.
not necessarily, and he wasn't elected consecutively.
No, he lost a couple races before he came back again and won his consecutive terms.
How about that?
First U.S.
Didn't give up.
First U.S. ambassador to East Germany after World War II. First U.S. ambassador to India. Just an incredible story.
Close friends with JFK.
Okay.
Served on the Warren Commission to investigate JFK's assassination.
Oh, wow.
He also had a pretty famous intern by the name of Mitch McConnell.
Oh, wow. I think I've heard that name before.
I know Senator McConnell and Senator Paul both have bottles of our 15-year release. I know Senator McConnell has the John Sherman Cooper as well.
Yes, I think Senator McConnell still has his bottle of the Barkley release, but I'm pretty sure that Rand and his staff, Senator Paul and his staff drank their bottle, which is sort of on brand for our two U.S. senators.
There you go. Nothing wrong with that.
Nope, not at all.
So when we did the Cooper, So each of our, as Damon mentioned earlier, each of our releases are 107 proof. That's just something that we decided to do for consistency. Mash bills are going to be different. The design of all the labels are the same, but for the John Sherman Cooper, who went to Center College, we decided to do black and gold, which are the Center College.
Oh,
colors.
Nice.
And Somerset calls us, and they're like, "Hey, you're doing the John Sherman Cooper. We want to have a function for you guys." So we went out there, and they put on a party. Actually, a bunch of the relatives of John Sherman Cooper. If you're going to use somebody's name, they have to be deceased for at least 50 years.
Okay.
And if they aren't, you have to get approval from the closest living family relative.
So have you actually had to go and do that at all for any of these, or are these
I
all
did.
been deceased? You did,
I had to go. I had to drive to Somerset on a rainy January day.
Okay.
And meet with his 90-some-year-old sister-in-law
Okay.
and her son to get permission
And-
to use his name, image, likeness on our bottle.
I was going to say, was there like an NIL deal that was struck there?
Just a handshake deal. Just a handshake deal.
Okay.
Like the Philippines Olympic guy, free ramen noodle, rest of the life.
And
Oh, man.
So they had this nice function for us, and Damon and I realized, going to these different regions throughout the state really adds a lot to our brand, and that's also, I believe, when we realized as non-distillery producers, either you buy on the open market, you source it through brokers, because there's always bourbon. The guys at Woodford, they're tasting their bourbon constantly, and sometimes they come across barrels that just don't fit their profile. It doesn't mean it's bad.
Right.
It just means it's not what they want. So they'll sell it through brokers. We realize that offering the consumer a transparent product that exposes them to what Kentucky has to offer, the best of Kentucky bourbon. That's what we want to do. We want to give them a little bit of history, but also present to the market, and to the extent we can in collaboration with our non-distillery producers, because we're also doing contract distillation now, and we'll go into that shortly, kind of expose the best of Kentucky to other people in Kentucky and to the rest of the country. And that's part of what our mission is.
So I think they'd really like it if we cracked open the bottle and sampled it.
Oh.
So while he's doing that, I'll let you know that this is a 75-21-4 mash bill. And like I said, it's a 107 proof. That's the traditional barrel proof for Weller Antique. Baker is a 7-year.
Evan Williams, 23.
Evan Williams, 23, and several of the Van Winkle family. And it's 8 years old. It has to be. Here's one of the many laws I voted for over the years. If it says Kentucky on the label, it has to be distilled, barreled, aged, and bottled in Kentucky. So we were chasing around some MGP juice, which MGP.
I love MGP too.
It's a great way to start a brand. And then Eric Gregory from the Kentucky Distillers Association called me up one day, and we were talking about it. Back then, it was a lot harder to find sourced bourbon than it is today. And Eric said, Senator, you voted for a bill a few years ago that says if you have Kentucky on the label, Kentucky Peerless, Kentucky Owl,
Right.
Kentucky Gentleman, Kentucky Senator. It's got to be Kentucky Juice.
Gotcha.
So,
Like crap.
That moment,
we spent a
the
year.
one time. What have I done?
I vote on like thousands of bills, so I might have forgotten that little detail. Thank God that Eric Gregory saved us on that.
No, that's funny.
That would have been embarrassing.
All right, guys. So what you're drinking is Kentucky Senator Bourbon, 8-year. It was released last year, 2023. It was, and I got off on a tangent there. Obviously distilled at a very well-known distillery in Bardstown.
Okay.
For a while, we moved it to Bardstown Bourbon Company after we bought it. It was bottled at Bluegrass Distillers right here on West 6th in Lexington.
Oh, nice.
It is like I said, 75, 21, and 4. So what do you get on the nose, and what do you think of the taste?
The nose, I'm getting
Get some spice right off the bat.
spice and a little bit of like maybe light banana. You getting a little bit of banana?
I did not. That's what I was talking to Alves about the other day when I had this. Because Cheater already had it last week.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Kenny, you cheater.
We had a tasting.
Yeah,
at
we had a
Justice House
tasting.
of
So I
Bourbon
went
in
down
Lexington.
there. Alves said he got more traditional bourbon notes. I got more minty and earthiness on the palate. As talked about, our listeners know my nose sucks because I'm always congested. So the nose part I got to leave to you guys.
You can listen to us. I would say like yes, I definitely get the caramel, a little bit of banana.
You getting dessert out of it?
Yeah, it's sweet.
Like a bread?
A little
Those
bit
are
of honey
sweet.
versus even
Yeah.
honey
We'll take
versus
that.
caramel.
We'll take
a little
that,
bit.
right, Andre?
Yeah, a little bit of honey versus caramel, maybe.
So a couple other notes. All 4 of our releases have won awards from Fred Minnick's group, the American Spirits Council of Tasters.
Okay.
Our first 3 releases won a gold award. This bourbon won a platinum.
Really?
This one a platinum,
Okay.
and we've always made it onto Fred's top 100 whiskeys of the year. This was number 58.
Wow.
Halfway.
Sounded like Casey Kasem's American Top 100, number 58,
I love it.
Kentucky Senator Bourbon, John
I love it.
Sherman Cooper, here on the
No.
countdown.
Take us away.
I'm an old radio hack. I couldn't resist that.
There you go. Perfect.
And it's just a coincidence that our last 3 releases are all named John.
Totally accidental, and as Andre said, a coinkadink.
Well, when you're talking about that, though, how does ultimately, like, how much research goes into determining what senator is going to be on the bottle? I mean, is that like a...
So we have a great book that has the history of all of Kentucky's U.S. senators. There's over 50 of them. Only 2 of them are still living, and that would be the 2 current occupants of the office, Senator Mitch McConnell and Senator Rand Paul. With the recent deaths of Wendell Ford, Jim Bunning, my political mentor.
Okay.
Because I used to live in northern Kentucky, and I came up under him. D. Huddleston. They've all passed away in the last 10 or so years, 10 or 15 years. So we've got a lot to choose from. Kentucky was the 15th state. So it was the original 13 colonies, then Vermont, then us. So we've been around a long time. We've got a lot of history, a lot to choose. So
Right.
it's just, we kind of come up with it together. Andre had the great idea in 2022 to do the John Carlisle release because it was the 125th anniversary of the Bottled in Bond Act. Alvin Barkley was our first. That was easy. I mean, he was vice president of the United States. He has a lake named after him. He was U.S. Senator when the Democrats had the majority, and he was majority leader. He was in when the Democrats were in the minority, and he was minority leader. So that was really easy. And I kind of go through the book, and then I bring my ideas to Andre, or he may come up with, like he came up with the Carlisle thing, and then we just kind of talk it over. We don't have a board of directors or anything.
Oh, nice.
It's us.
See, I would say who's been dead 50 years or longer,
Right.
so I don't have to go find a family member. But
Well,
you go.
it adds a layer of work.
Just filter?
dead 50 more years or more.
It adds a layer of work. Now, I will tell you, I am very good friends with several of Jim Bunning's children. He had a lot of them. He had 9 of them, and he has like 68 grandchildren and a bunch of great grandchildren.
So are you hinting there might be...
Well, I already have permission
Okay.
from 2 of his sons.
All right.
That whenever we want to name a bottle for Jim Bunning,
Okay.
that
Nice.
that's
cool.
They
Very
give
good.
permission. So that's something that would be very personal to me because I wouldn't be where I am today
Right.
in Kentucky politics if Jim Bunning hadn't taken an interest in me back in 1997.
There you go. Special release. See?
Well, we'll
Right?
see. And we like to say Kentucky Senator Bourbon we serve up great Kentucky bourbon with a side of Kentucky history.
Okay.
Every bottle tells a story.
I like that.
We're always going to have a story on the back of the bottle with a label that has a short bio on each of our namesakes with a longer bio at the website.
And that's what makes the bottle special because everyone likes to drink and have a conversation.
Right.
And you got it all in one bottle.
Perfect. I love it.
And the colors are different. So when we got to the 3rd bottle, people started realizing, oh, wow, that's kind of a collector's deal.
Gotcha.
It also made Damon and I realize we had to be a little bit better at our quality control to make sure everything looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
Because everything's hand bottled at Bluegrass Distillers, so we they do a great job for us down there. By the way, but hand bottling sometimes you can get some variations in label placement. So we like to encourage people to buy 2 bottles, 1 to drink, 1 to collect. It is a very nice collectible series now.
Right.
If you go to our website kysenatorbourbon.com, you can see a photo of the 5 bottles. You can see the mash bills of each release. You can see their bios there of the U.S. senators who we've chosen, and we've got big plans for expansion too. It started out as just kind of a fun hobby idea. We
Right.
raised a little bit of money, not a lot, put up some of our own, had a handful of guys jump in, and then all of a sudden it started taking off, and now we think we've got a real thing going. We're just distributed in Kentucky.
I was going to ask that, so I'm glad that you brought that up.
Yeah,
because-
Kentucky Eagle's our distributor.
Okay.
With 2 caveats. The guys at Justin's have bourbonoutfitter.com.
Bourbonoutfitter.com. Shout out.
And
That's one of our sponsors.
Bourbonoutfitter.com. Bourbonoutfitter.com.
There you go. Yeah, there you go. Plug it.
They have purchased our bourbon from us, shipped it to Washington, D.C., and shipped it to states where direct ship is legal right from the start.
Perfect.
They bought bottles and to sell at both stores in Louisville and Lexington. So bourbonoutfitter.com, people can order from there.
Perfect.
If you're in a legal shipping state. And also, I'm friends with Bill Thomas, the owner of Jack Rose Dining Saloon, which has been awarded by multiple sources the best bourbon bar in North America.
No, that is the place.
You can get Kentucky Senator Bourbon
that is the place.
at Jack Rose in Washington, D.C.
Damon did a great job of kind of feet on the ground doing marketing before we ever did our first release. So by the time that we actually decided to do it and we went to Kentucky Eagle, we were able to say, look, we already have a distributor who's going to do it online for us, because Kentucky Eagle didn't offer that. We had already had multiple conversations with multiple retailers that Damon and I had lined up. So basically, when we walked into Kentucky Eagle, we had half of it sold already. Mm-hmm. It was just a matter of us getting the product to them. We were
Liquor Barn.
There you
Liquor
go,
Barn,
yeah.
of course. Liquor Barn's been a fantastic supporter of ours. Our first release,
Brad Williams.
Brad, they bought
great,
a
yeah.
very large allotment, and then for these 4 releases in this vertical, Brad has done a single barrel pick every year. So while we've done 5 releases, the reality is there's 9 different variations on the market right now.
Oh, wow.
There's 5 small batches and 4 single barrels.
Okay.
Liquor Barn's been a great supporter. You had asked about blending. I mean, really, to the extent that we've done blending, it's been a situation where we'll pull 6 barrels down. The last release was 7, and Brad comes and he picks one of those 6 barrels, or 7, as the Liquor Barn release. And we bring a group of our investors and friends and other industry people.
Influencers like you guys.
Oh,
wow.
You could be invited in the future.
I'm off work on Wednesdays and Thursdays, and I've done tons of picks. I am very well known in the community.
Here he goes.
I'm good,
That adds to our transparency.
and I can keep a secret.
So that's been sort of our blending experience
Yeah.
so far,
That's
is
awesome,
getting
though.
that group together and tasting those barrels. Very collaborative, but it's not a democracy, as Brad likes to say. At the end of the day, he makes the final decision. And it's interesting because there was one time where everybody sort of agreed that barrel number 2 is the best. And Brad was like, yeah, but barrel number 3 was number 2. Maybe one of the other barrels might need a little bit of help. So he was kind enough not to take necessarily the best tasting barrel.
Yeah.
And helping us kind of, spread some of that good juice around.
He wanted that barrel in the
Right.
small batch blend.
Yeah.
That's
Just
also
help the small.
That's good, yeah.
Just help the blend out.
Yeah,
Correct.
and the barrel he picked is extraordinary. But the only place right now where you can get a single barrel pick of Kentucky Senator Bourbon is at Liquor Barn, all 23 of their Kentucky locations. I call Brad their bourbon impresario. He has a different title than that, but he likes
Yeah.
it when I call him bourbon impresario.
He's done a pick or 2 over the years.
Our barrel picks are really fun with him. He's, as Andre said, he's very inclusive. He's made some extraordinary single barrel picks, and as we grow, we're going to do more releases a year. We hope that Brad and Liquor Barn will continue to do a single barrel pick, but we've got other places, Justin's and Bourbon Outfitter.
Right.
We've talked to Ryan. BourbonOutfitter.com.
Use code the mashup.
Use code the mashup for 5% off.
There you go. We talked to Ryan about doing a barrel pick where they split it half between Justin's and half between Bourbon Outfitter. And
Right.
we've got a bar and a restaurant that wants to do a barrel pick. So
Nice.
we're really excited to be able to expand the brand that way.
I do have a question.
Yes.
Oh, there
So
we go.
the 7, 8, and 9 year releases have been, like you said, from the same
6, 7, 8, and 9
6,
year.
7 as well. So how many barrels do you have left to continue that? And you also mentioned earlier about doing some contract distilling.
So that batch was 25 barrels. So we're
Okay.
done with that. And then we were going to do 6 and save 1 to do a 10-year bourbon.
Okay.
But we decided that you lose so much volume each year, and we wanted
Yeah.
to kind of be at the same size releases. So we did the last group of 7 decided we'll do something else for a 10-year-old bourbon later. So that lot's done.
Oh, that's done. So this 9-year is
the last of that group.
Okay.
But we currently have some bourbon that next year will be 8 years, 6 years, 9 years. We haven't really decided what we're going to use for what yet. So we have some bourbon in storage.
Okay.
And which is all sourced bourbon. And last year we started doing our first contract distillation. But going back to what I mentioned. And we're doing that. We did our first contract distillation at Whiskey Thief. They're great partners of ours. Damon and I mean, we've really enjoyed going out and meeting the distilleries. I mean, the industry is so inclusive, and they want people to succeed.
Absolutely.
And, I mentioned earlier, as we started doing these different releases, going to different communities, originally we were going to go to one distillery and do 2,000 barrels, and just age it and let it go. And what we realized is there's a lot of distilleries here. And we want to offer, like I said, the best of what Kentucky has. So we have decided that we're going to go to multiple distilleries and do 200-barrel batches and 50-barrel batches.
Oh, wow. I like
so
that.
we can continue to kind of provide to the public that opportunity.
That's pretty cool.
And for our contract distillers, we're asking them right up front, when we go to release this, we don't want to just white label it or put it on our label. We want to be collaborative about it. We want to talk about where we got this, how we got it, who was our partner. So we're about to sign our second contract for our contract distillation. We just have met with 4 distilleries so far. Kind of continuing to do that tour. We'll do 200 barrels this year. Next year we'll probably do 400 barrels of contract distillation.
I will tell you, us in the whiskey nerd community side, we love the transparency. So
Absolutely.
Versus like the whole, where's it not, you're not from. So yeah, if you're able to collaborate with them and say where it came from, that's also great for us.
I think, we can just tell you right now, we've got 50 barrels of Green River juice that's currently aging in Midway at the new Bluegrass Distillers warehouse there.
They have put out some good stuff
really
lately.
good stuff. Yeah.
It'll be 5 years old in August, which means in the fall of 2025 we'll have a 6-year release of that.
Beautiful.
We bought 50
barrels of BBC.
50 barrels of BBC.
Nice.
8-year-old bourbon.
Wow.
So that may be so we're going to go to we've just done one release a year for 3 years in a row. Next year we're probably going to do 2 Kentucky Senator Bourbon releases.
Nice.
Probably an 8-year in the spring and a 6-year in the fall. Mm-hmm. And then we've got the 50 barrels of Whiskey Thief aging. That'll turn 1 year in October, so we're 5 years away. But we've had a great meeting at Castle and Key. Last week, Andre and I went to the absolutely spectacular Log Still Distillery in Gethsemane.
I've heard great things.
I was blown away.
That's
What Wally
awesome.
Dant is doing down there is spectacular. It's absolutely
at every level.
I mean, the bourbon is great. They've got a barrel aged gin.
I know that we can go and do a lot of depth here, but I know that with Log Still, the whole thing with Wally Dant trying to restart Log Still didn't he get sued originally? Or wasn't there?
He
thing
got
going
sued.
on?
I'll defer to my lawyer.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't want to. I'm just saying. I'm
That's a
glad
very
he's
good partner to have.
persevered to do that. But
So it's Log Still Distillery because the history is that there was a methodology where they were having the still kind of using a log for the condensation.
Right.
But they originally released Dance, and unfortunately for the Dant family, the family in the 50s had sold the label to a company. I don't remember which company it was.
So United or somebody,
which was
that,
a predecessor, which eventually ended up as a Heaven Hill product,
right?
And who still makes the JW Dant or the WJ Dant?
JW Dant.
I apologize.
It's all good.
And it's one of the it's a bottom level. I mean, it's not a heavily marketed, heavily promoted.
It's a 4-year bottle and bond bottom shelfer, though, right?
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
So they're not spending a lot of marketing dollars on it. So there was a trademark dispute about that, and the Dant family, Wally's family, lost that dispute because Heaven Hill was able to produce a line of documents that showed that the company that purchased it, and let's say it was National, I don't remember which company it was at the time, had actually purchased the rights forever and ever from all family members.
Dang.
Because their argument was, it's our name. Why can't we make a bourbon after our name? Well, somebody actually sold the name, so that wasn't very fair. It was interesting. At the same time, there was litigation, exactly the same time, involving Castle and Key.
I remember that. We've talked a little bit about that, but with the Taylor name.
Right. So Castle and Key bought the old E.H. Taylor distillery.
Right.
And, they went to clean it up and pulled back all the vines. And if you've been there on the top of the castle, it says E.H. Taylor Distillery.
That's right.
That's what it says. So in not on their bottles, but in their advertising materials, they said, and I'm not saying this is 100% the story, but I'm pretty close in case.
This is a facts optional podcast.
Yeah,
Yeah.
facts optional.
Just in case Will Armin's
our-
listening and says I have it wrong.
That's our little catchphrase. Facts optional.
She's going to end up liking our posts.
Anyway, they went out and they said Castle and Key made at the old E.H. Taylor Distillery. Well, of course, Sazerac didn't appreciate that owning the brand now. And the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals said, well, that's a fact.
Boom.
It's true.
Yep.
That's what the
it's there.
That's what the castle says.
Mic drop.
Which I think gave the Dant family a lot of confidence in their litigation until Heaven Hill was able to produce these documents from the 50s that said, we've sold it to you.
Dang.
But going back to what Damon was saying, I mean, that distillery.
So you got a partnership there. That's
Yes.
yeah.
We may do some contract distilling down there. We're getting ready to sign a contract with Castle and Key. Mm-hmm. We talked to Wally Dant at Log Still. We're going down to Garrett County Distilling. Mm-hmm. And
we also have a meeting lined up with the operational name right now is Potter Jane, which is Denny Potter and Jane Bowie.
Oh, yeah.
The makers.
Yep.
And I didn't realize Denny had also been at Heaven Hill before that. So they're supposed to go online in January of 25. Of course, Wally's already online and Castle Key's been online for a while. So it's been really fun as these guys have reached out to us or we've reached out to them and they've accommodated Damon and I coming to visit with them. But we're pretty upfront that we really want to be able to say that we're collaborating with these distilleries in the
That's
future.
great.
in other words, it would say distilled, aged, bottled at Castle and Key Distillery, Frankfort, Kentucky.
Oh, nice.
It would say, and you can see on our bottle right now, it says bottled by Bluegrass Distillers, Lexington, Kentucky for Kentucky Senator Spirits.
Right.
When we start releasing our contract juice, if our contractor agrees, we want to tell people that it was distilled,
I love that.
aged, and bottled at Whiskey Thief, at Castle and Key.
Absolutely love that.
At Log Still. Before we get back to Kentucky Senator and our new release, I'm so excited about what I saw at Log Still. I just want to put in one more plug for Wally Dant.
Sure.
His brand is called Monk's Road, and he started out with source juice like we did, but now his distillery is cranking down there. If you have not been to Log Still Distillery, I highly recommend it. They do 18 to 20 concerts a year in their amphitheater.
Okay.
They have cottages and homes that have been renovated throughout the property that are Airbnbs. They have a great tasting room, wonderful tour. Highly recommend.
Road trip.
It's not
do a whole weekend.
It took us an hour. Took us an hour from Lexington.
An hour from Versailles. They're going to open up their restaurant here hopefully in the fall. They were putting some finishing touches on it while we were there. They built a conference center. Beautiful place to have a wedding. I mean, they've just done it first rate. The distillery is just gorgeous. It's super clean, super awesome. They have room for expansion. Wally is just such a down-to-earth, nice guy. So we're looking forward to hopefully having a collaboration with them.
Now, my question,
love it.
when you're buying these barrels and you're contracting, are you also aging them at the same place that they are distilling them, or are you going to age them somewhere else?
It depends. We ideally we would like to do distillation, barreling, storage, and bottling all at the same place.
Okay.
But obviously, we're in a very price competitive market, and right now, actually, it's a pretty good situation for us because there are a lot of people in the contract distilling space who weren't there 4 or 5 years ago. People come up to us all the time and they're like, "Where's your distillery?" We don't have one. Are you going to build one? No. Why would we do that when everyone else is building a distillery
Right.
and can
And they
make
will
bourbon?
contract with you.
I mean, our plan is to continue to be a non-distiller producer who sources bourbon as well as a contract distiller. And that's how we're going to grow our brand. And we're going to be very transparent.
Not only do we want to be transparent, we want to be an ambassador for the brand in the sense that we want our investors, and hopefully as we grow and we get a better following for people specific to our brand, we want to be able to go to our partners, whether it's Castle and Key or Potter Jane or Log Still, and say, okay, we're having the Kentucky Senator Bourbon weekend. We want you to come into town. We're going to have food. We're going to have an event on a Saturday, and be able to push that out to our fans, the people that like our bourbon.
Yeah.
So not only do we let our investors and our consumers enjoy that experience, we also get to add that to what the distillery can do as a marketing opportunity.
Right.
So Damon's the marketing genius. He's coming up with all these ideas, but we really, really, really want to let America and the rest of the world know that Kentucky has great bourbon, and there's a lot of it, and there's no reason we can't share that glory with a lot of people.
We get spoiled here, and we talk
like
about that. There's a lot of our listeners that'll like message us about they don't have like all the stuff we talk about and we actually review on the show. They don't have access to, and for us here, we just kind of take it for granted, So we just kind of take it for granted because how much bourbon we have. So you'll see people that'll post, made a trip to Kentucky and look what I came back with, and we're just like, man, that's just our normal day.
It is our normal day, and sometimes I wonder if we have a real business pursuit here or just an excuse for Andre and I to travel around to different distilleries and say, we'd really like to taste your distillate to see if it meets our standards.
That's smart.
So the 9-year release you guys are tasting now.
Right.
And I wanted to have them pour that because I was fortunate enough to try them side by side last week, and I wanted them to try the 8-year next to the 9-year both,
So this is the same juice that was in our 6, 7, and 8 year.
Yeah.
75% corn, 21% rye, 4% malted barley. Again, from a heritage distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky. Aged 9 years, 107 proof. It's named for Senator John Brown.
Okay.
Kentucky's first U.S. senator. He was a congressman from Virginia from the District of Kentucky. And he filed the bill to make Kentucky the 15th state. I'm told by the folks at Liberty Hall, his homestead in Frankfort, that he actually tried to make us the 14th state, but Vermont got their bill passed first.
Oh.
So he had 13 colonies.
Screw you, Vermont.
Yeah, Vermont, dang Bernie Sanders state.
Vermont had to have a war with New York to do that. Vermont had to have a war with New York in order to exist.
Holy cow.
So Vermont became the 14th state.
Getting an education tonight.
Every bottle tells a story.
There you go.
Remember?
Love it.
Serving up a great Kentucky bourbon to the side of Kentucky history.
I love it.
So John Brown's bill passed the Congress. It was signed into law by President George Washington. Kentucky became the 15th state. Back then, the legislature voted on who would be the U.S. senators in Kentucky. We've only had the direct election of U.S. senators now for 120 years, something like that. And they rewarded Congressman John Brown by making him Kentucky's first U.S. senator. His home is Liberty Hall in Frankfort, which is on the National Register of Historic Places. And we're going to have an event there. We're going to do a tasting there in November to celebrate the legacy of John Brown, just like we had an event in Covington to celebrate John G. Carlisle, just like we had an event in Somerset to celebrate John Sherman Cooper. We're going to have an event in Frankfort to celebrate John Brown. He was quite an amazing man. He was very close with Thomas Jefferson and James Madison, of course, the great Federalists who believed in states' rights. Liberty Hall, I've learned since visiting it a few weeks ago, is designed based on some architectural designs that Thomas Jefferson came up with. So the great thing about each time we do a release, we get to help educate Kentuckians about one of the people who, whether you know much about that person or not, one of those people who is an important part of Kentucky's history. So how do you like the bourbon?
Yeah, no, I go ahead. You got something you want to say about the bourbon?
No, I was going to say that 9 year, that extra year is really bringing out.
That's why I wanted y'all to have it next to the 8 year. That extra year did really good.
If I can for a minute, the 8 year might be power of persuasion, but like on the 8 year on the palate, I get the like honeycomb, mint, a little bit of like earthy tones that Kenny was talking about earlier. I like it. But once you go to the 9 year, it evens it out. Like it becomes way more of a balanced whiskey.
Yeah, like the 8 year is smooth.
The 8 year
but
smooth.
But
the 9 is like
really smooth.
I actually was going to tell you guys like, why don't you save some barrels to let it go a little bit longer? Because I bet you at like 10, 11, 12, this would be like out of this world.
Back in 2021, we basically took all the cash we made on the first release, the 15-year bourbon named for Alvin Barkley.
Right.
And we used it to buy these 25 barrels that made up our 6, 7, 8, and 9 year. I wish we would have had more cash and could have bought more barrels.
You
Because
reinvested in your company? How dare you?
Because it's delicious juice.
Yeah,
it's delicious
No, it
juice
is for
from a
sure.
heritage distillery in Bardstown, Kentucky that
Right.
we're all familiar with.
Yeah.
We have no NDAs, but if you're
We
not
have
saying
not
it, I'm
signed
not
an
going to say
NDA.
it. I'm not going to say
You
it.
can ask the question.
Did you have anything else about? I mean, I don't want to say anything but did you have anything else with tasting notes that you were thinking about? I mean, I think it's very.
I get earthy and minty, and when I had it the other day, to me, it tasted even more. I'm not saying like a dusty, but it tasted a little older because of that earthiness and mintiness that I get on some of like my dusty
On the
products
8 or
too.
9?
The 9.
We're getting a big juicy raisin out of it.
You can
Yeah.
tell
No,
the
it's-
difference.
It's turned a corner.
Yeah, the
9
two.
year.
And,
My
and
goodness.
if you think about the summers we've had the last couple of years, hot.
Right.
And long. Our summers have been longer. You get that expansion of that juice into the barrel. And we've had pretty cold winters, at least cold enough to extract that.
Get it back in there.
Yeah,
A little
exactly.
more oakiness.
So you can tell. You can tell the difference.
It's not often we see this either, but when I look at them side by side, the color is actually darker on the 9 year than it is on the 8.
Yeah.
And that's
Just
like
that extra
1 year,
year.
you're going, my goodness. I mean, it's not usually that drastic, but it does look a lot darker. Yeah.
There was a dramatic difference between the 7 and 8.
Oh, really?
I think it was the
That was
weather,
the
the
turning point?
summers. It just really was a totally different tasting bourbon. Kind of going back to some of the stuff Damon was saying. You know, I mentioned earlier about my great grandfather being Basil Hayden, and
Right.
and everybody has these stories, and they're going to find some recipe in the bottom of the family Bible and revive it.
Now you're speaking our language. Go ahead.
But Damon and I decided, we're just going to be a little bit more straightforward. I mean, we're not making up a story about what we're doing. We're just trying to source the best bourbon we can find that we
Right.
can afford, and that we can present with a little bit of history, and something that you can collect. We like to say buy 2 bottles, one to drink and one to keep on the shelf, because eventually we want somebody to have a shelf that just has all these bourbons, all these different colors, all these different histories.
Right.
And we also, as brand extensions, are going to do some other states. And Damon kind of gave me an opening, and I didn't mention it earlier, but like one of our releases next year, we hope, and we're totally planning on it, is the Louisiana Senator. Now, it's going to be a Kentucky bourbon.
Oh, wow.
So one thing, it will be a Kentucky bourbon. It will always be a Kentucky bourbon. It will always be at least 6 years old. It will always be 107. But it's going to be the Huey Long. But then this year we did the John Brown, which I'm not from Kentucky. I'm not familiar with him. Well, his son, Jack Brown, first U.S. Senator from Louisiana.
Oh,
Get
wow.
outta here.
Holy cow.
So,
my goodness.
Like meant to be.
Maybe there'll be two Louisiana senators. The first one's going to be the Huey Long, though. So we're looking forward to doing that.
Most famous politician in Louisiana history. And, we're going to do these brand extensions if people come to us from other states and say, hey, can we do a Georgia Senator bourbon, a Louisiana Senator bourbon? We're open to that. But we also, our plan is, as we ramp up production, we want to start selling Kentucky Senator bourbon in other states. Obviously, that's the key to growth. We still have growth here in Kentucky that we can that we can achieve. And by the way, the 9-year release, which has an orange label, Senator John Brown, is available at Justin's House of Bourbon, Lexington and Louisville.
Okay.
It's available at bourbonoutfitter.com. It's available at all 23 Liquor Barn outlets and at bars and restaurants throughout Kentucky. Frank and Dino's here in downtown Lexington, they have a cocktail, the Lexus Raven, that they make with Kentucky Senator Bourbon.
Oh, nice.
Kentucky Downs, down on the Kentucky-Tennessee border, the racetrack down there that has a huge historical horse racing facility, and they're building a circus sports book down there. They're going to do a flight of Kentucky Senator Bourbon 6, 7, and 8 year, or 7, 8, and 9 year. So as we get into this, and more and more places put us in cocktails or have flights, we'll continue to grow, and we'll continue to purchase sourced bourbon and put it out on the marketplace, and we'll continue to contract distill. Our first contract distilled juice will be available in 5 years. So October, let's call it fourth quarter 2029. That'll be that whiskey thief.
Christmas.
Okay.
Watch out.
When I first got it.
And it might be a Christmas release. So
When I first got involved in the horse business, they said nothing kept you young like the horse business because it's a 3-year timeline between breeding a mare and maybe that horse running.
Okay.
And then I started getting involved in bourbon.
There you go.
And it's a 6-year timeline.
There are people that will distill stuff that will never get to see their greatest
Exactly.
distillate because of age and different things. Yeah. I mean, reflecting so far, you guys are at the really like the ground floor. And what have been your greatest challenges and also your things that you've been most proud of?
Well, the ironic thing is how it got started. Senator Jimmy Higdon, who's from Marion County, and in his Senate district, 45% of the world's bourbon is aged because he has Nelson County and Marion County.
Is he the guy that owns the liquor stores too, or no?
Used to.
Okay,
yeah,
used to. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, he's the one who
I know a little bit.
He owned convenience stores. And
Okay,
he's the guy who tackled someone trying to steal a bag of candy from him.
I figured. I was
on
trying to figure
YouTube,
out.
look up Jimmy Higdon tackling.
Okay, got it.
He brought me this label of this.
awesome.
This he's a great guy, and he's a big guy too. He brought me this old label that he found with an eagle on it called Kentucky Senator Bourbon. I thought, wow, that's really cool. And we know the guys at Pinhook Bourbon through the horse business,
right?
And we knew they were releasing bourbons named after horses who race in their Bourbon Lane stable. So I just had this idea. I have an entrepreneurial spirit. My dad and my mom my parents were entrepreneurs, owned a machine shop up in northern Michigan where I grew up. And I went to Andre and I said, hey, I want to revive this bourbon. Andre's my business lawyer as well as my friend and for my consulting business. I said, I need someone to help me with the legal work because it's enormous, all the hoops you have to jump through. And he said, I like your idea. Let's be 50-50 partners. He told me, he pointed at me, he says, you do all the marketing. And he pointed himself. He says, I'll do all the legal work and we'll figure everything else out.
That's
and
awesome.
That's how we formed the company. We formed Kentucky
like
Senator
that, man.
Spirits
That's
LLC.
cool.
That's amazing.
He submitted the paperwork to the U.S. Patent Administration. We had to wait 6 months. No one else claimed the brand. We own it. And here we are. That was 2018 or 2019.
Yeah, I mean, it's a long story, but then so when you get a trademark, you have to use it within 3 years, or you use it, or you lose it.
Have you trademarked U.S. Senator Bourbon? Because my gears are turning right now. I'm thinking maybe I can.
We have all the trademarks. We have all the trademarks.
Presidential bourbon. Sorry, Andre. I didn't mean to interrupt you like that.
Those are all brand extensions. We, one day
I'm thinking too.
We're going to have a presidential brand extension if we get the right bourbon.
There you go.
Just think about that vertical, that collection.
Yeah.
That would be really something.
We have
You have like a bottom shelfer with the worst American president.
we have
You're trying to trigger me now.
No. I'm
Because I'm also a student of presidential history.
No,
and
I
I
want
can
to hear
name
what
the
Andre
worst
says.
ones.
Never mind.
I'm loving this because
we have plans to have a governor series,
this.
which would be the governor series would be a whiskey,
4 year.
at least a 4-year whiskey.
Very good.
Senator sounds better.
A congressman or congressional series, that would be a rye.
Nice.
2 year.
Yeah.
Two
I think for
years.
the president, it needs to be called 2-term.
Well, for the
Or 8-year.
well, the presidential
perfect.
series will only be a special release series when we get that opportunity to have some really good juice. Like if we were able to get another 15-year, we would have to think about doing a presidential
That would be
series for
good.
that. Yeah, all these brand extensions and these different ways of looking at it. But when you get a trademark, you have 3 years to use it. Damon and I got our trademark. I believe I might miss it by a couple of weeks, but it was, I think, February 22nd, February 23rd of 2018. COVID hit. We went through some iterations, like you said, about realizing we had to buy Kentucky juice. Finally, we kind of settle on this great product. We have everything scheduled out. We're going to bottle it the February 10th, go to market. That big ice storm hits, doesn't show up. Can't get it here. We were able to get it to our bottler and bottle it and sell our first case to Bourbon Outfitters.
Oh, nice.
The day
Bourbon Outfitter.
BourbonOutfitter.com, excuse me.
use code the mashup
Use
for
code
5%
mashup.
off.
We have a picture of Ryan with a case and a check. One day before we lost our trademark.
Oh,
But
man.
that ice storm got you nervous.
So that was one of our biggest challenges.
Right on the edge. There,
I think
perfect.
I'm as a marketing guy, I'm really proud that we won a double platinum award from the American Spirits Council of Tasters for marketing, for
Right.
brand development, for basically our label.
Right.
That was pretty cool. And we're going to start submitting our bourbons to more of these awards. So far, we've just stuck with the Ascot Awards, and we've won awards with every one of our releases. That's something we're proud of, and we're just proud to be a part of the Kentucky bourbon industry. It's I know all these guys from working in the legislature for 10, 12 years, and it's just a great bunch of people who compete against each other, but really work well together for the greater good, which you don't see that in a lot of industries. Trust me.
And then Damon and I both have a very significant connection to the horse industry. So even though we don't really necessarily publicize that connection as far as it relates to our bourbon, we're a bourbon sponsor for Kentucky Downs. So on
Nice.
September the 8th, it will be Kentucky Senator Bourbon Day. As the bourbon sponsor, second year we do it. Everybody who wins a race will get a bottle of Kentucky Senator Bourbon that is specially etched. It's a laser glass cutting etch. It's a super cool thing they do. And during the day they will talk about our bourbon. But as Damon and I go to horse races around the world, we're always thinking, is there a place for Kentucky Senator Bourbon here?
That's right. I went to a big horse sale in London in June before the Royal Ascot meeting, and
Never say die.
there you go. He was the first Kentucky bred winner of the Epsom Derby.
There you go.
And now there's a bourbon name for him. So I see all this rosé wine, and I see these gins, and I'm like, man, wouldn't it be cool if we could have Kentucky Senator Bourbon here in London? So but we've been given good advice by people who have succeeded in the spirits business not to grow too fast. So we're going to be very contemplative and strategic, and grow bit by bit by bit, and grow the brand, and let it take us where the market wants. But what I've learned in my short time in the business is, in order to succeed in the bourbon business, you have to have great juice, obviously,
right?
And you have to have a great looking bottle with a great label, and I think we do.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But you also have to have a great story with legs,
Right.
And I think, pardon the pun about the legs, but I think we do, and I think we're going to have staying power, and we've got 50 U.S. senators to move through, and all these brand extensions, and all these potential partnership possibilities, and very excited about the future. And for a couple of guys like us who our transplants came here because of the horse industry, basically,
right,
to end up in the bourbon business, it's pretty cool. Pretty cool thing.
That's a pretty cool story.
That's great.
No, it's a great story, and we are so happy that you guys came here tonight to share that story with us, and I know our listeners are going to appreciate it very much. And Kentucky Senator Bourbon is something that I did not know a lot about until tonight.
That's so funny because, when we started the podcast, you guys said you started during COVID. That's
Right.
when the podcast started.
Right.
And we remembered just off air, Anthony and I were talking what's this Kentucky Senator Bourbon?
Yeah.
It kind of came out of nowhere. And so that's funny, Andre, you said you didn't really do any marketing.
Yeah.
Because we were we didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
Of course, we were new at the time. We could have missed it. But
We didn't have the budget to do any marketing.
I'm not going to lie to you. I saw the press release, and I'm like, why is a senator getting into bourbon?
Yeah.
And I was like, what is going on here? And now sitting here so many years later and
Talking to
listening
you
to
guys,
this and talking to you guys is all come full
Connects the
circle.
dots. It makes sense.
And it makes a lot of sense.
I mean, I'm getting out of elected politics for the time being.
Yes.
After 22 years in the Kentucky State Senate, to focus on helping Andre build this brand together, and it's been a great ride. People can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, Kentucky
Right.
Senator Bourbon. Our website is kysenatorbourbon.com.
Just go to the mashup for 30% off.
Bourbon Outfitter.com.
I'm teasing.
percentage.
Teasing.
Kenny, you always got to do that.
You guys are a riot.
I think as transplants, Damon and I are really ambassadors of the state. We're fortunate that we get to travel a lot. We've been to a lot of places. We've both, we weren't raised on bourbon. Damon was a horse guy since he was a kid, but he wasn't raised on the thoroughbred racing industry of Kentucky. In Louisiana, everybody had a horse. We had some great tracks, but it wasn't something that was part of me. And we're both very, very passionate about bourbon and horses in Kentucky.
So now you're able to do what you love.
Yeah,
And we
there you
have
go.
an opportunity to combine all of those things. I'm not saying it's a horse brand,
Right.
Because it's not, but it's a great extension as we get to travel around the country and the world to a certain extent. And now we have something that we can bring to England and Germany, Italy, Japan, France, and maybe create and cultivate relationships where we can introduce our bourbon and Kentucky's greatest spirit, the greatest spirit of America, to these new locations. So, I'm having a blast. I mean, how much fun can you have to go to a horse race and own a bourbon?
Oh yeah,
Exactly.
absolutely. No, and on that, man, I mean, honest to God, hey, just don't forget about us. If you ever need us to come taste,
Yeah,
we'll
we're
come
open.
taste for you.
You guys are in.
All right, sounds good.
I would do it on a Wednesday, maybe when Kenny can't come.
Rough crowd.
It is.
And with that, thanks for listening to this episode. Please like and follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at The Mashup KY.
Don't forget to visit our partner, bourbonoutfitter.com. Enter code The Mashup for a special discount.
Also,
Head on over to our partner, the Woodwork Collective, at woodworkcollective.shop. Enter code MASHUP for a 15% discount.
let us know your thoughts as bottom in the comment section. Until next time, keep it neat.